between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another very busy week in Westminster. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, faced calls to resign following his unprecedented intervention in the Commons on Wednesday. Has he saved his skin for the moment? I'll be asking Deputy PM Oliver Dowden for his thoughts on this. And in the wake of Lee Anderson's suspension yesterday, are the Tories losing their MPs as well as their way? I'll be grilling Red Len McCluskey in a GB News exclusive, the former head of the Unite Union and close comrade of Jeremy Corbyn. With great divides on the left as well as the right emerging over the Gaza ceasefire vote, is the culture of intimidation once again gaining momentum within the Labour Party? As we mark the 2-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war this weekend, I'll be speaking to the former Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkind to find out if he still believes Putin will be deposed in the near future. I'll be sharing an exclusive interview with the Israeli father whose baby's birth certificate was returned defaced and ripped from the Home Office earlier this week. And I'll also be joined by someone at the heart of the loan charge tax row with HMRC, who'll be telling me why this could be as devastating for the government as the Post Office scandal. It's going to be a roller coaster 90 minutes of punchy political chat, so don't go anywhere. Well, to go through the papers this morning, as ever, I'm delighted to be joined now by Nicholas Owen, former BBC broadcaster and journalist. Nick, lovely to see you.
Good morning to you.
Quite the weekend with everything going on with Lee Anderson. Let's get straight in. Well, let's talk first of all, we're calling it Politicians in Peril. It's the Sunday Telegraph front page. It's also reflected on the front of the Sunday Times. Bodyguards for MPs as extremism threat rises. I mean, this is a sorry state of affairs. We're hearing about 3 female MPs now needing security, even though they're backbenchers. Now, I think none of the papers are naming them for understandable reasons. I think one of them must be Suella Braverman, because she was in this seat a couple of weeks ago revealing to us that she had to retain her bodyguards despite standing down as Home Secretary because of the threat she's faced. But my goodness, aren't we in uncharted territory here?
Yes, we are. I mean, I'm surprised if it's only 3, frankly. Yes. Let's just remind ourselves, obviously, senior members of the Cabinet get security, I mean, full up, armed and everything else. Not all ministers do. There's some quite prominent ones do. I don't think, for example, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, despite the fact all the things he does with our money, he doesn't merit it. But as you say, what a sad situation we're coming down to it when individual MPs start having to... Well, when we say hire bodyguards, if that's the right expression, of course, it'll all be on the taxpayer.
Yes.
Fair enough. Maybe that's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
But if we start with 3 female MPs, remind ourselves that it was, you know, 1 female and 1 male MP who were actually murdered while they were serving. terrifying situation. And I can't believe that it won't just get worse, frankly. Once you start this, I think it'll be a situation where people will say every MP will need a lot more protection.
Look, I think this Gaza conflict has become so toxic now, the debate becoming so divisive. Obviously, we've seen those scenes outside Parliament with From the River to the Sea being projected onto Big Ben. We saw the surrounding of Tobias Ellwood's house. We saw the surrounding of Wes Streeting's and others' offices. We also had this incident, this sort of shenanigans in Parliament last week with Lindsay Hoyle. What's the coverage saying about the Speaker now, this morning, and his future?
Well, I mean, I remember hearing on Friday evening, I think it was, various political shows and question times and things. Oh, Lindsay Hoyle, he's toast, you know, he'll be gone, but he'll have to go by the weekend. Well, he's still in a post at the moment, isn't he? But it's a bit hard to see him, how he can get out of this. It's a real conundrum here, isn't it? What sort of pressure was put on him by Sir Keir Starmer?
Yes.
Do you know, all I have heard from Starmer is, and all of us have heard, is one line saying, oh, no question of it, or whatever the phrase he used. I think an awful lot of people are not going to be at all happy with that.
Well,
what the devil happened in that little office behind the Speaker's chair?
We heard he went in shortly before this moment where Lindsay Hoyle obviously chose the Labour amendment, you know, broke with protocol, broke with his own clerk's advice. We then also heard that the Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, was in the office too. Kate Ferguson in The Sun on Sunday here has got a line suggesting that Labour MPs boasted Sir Keir Starmer was going to, quotes, fix the Speaker.
Fix the Speaker, yeah. Well, of course, this is this a case that, one way or another, you know, what words we use, but it was made clear to Lindsay Hoyle, if he wants to go on being Speaker when the new government comes in, and everybody, particularly the bookmakers, think it's all going to be a Labour government with a huge majority as well. If he wants to continue to be Speaker, he'd better sort of toe the party line, remembering, of course, that he's still a Labour MP, though he not supposed to show any political views, whatever. I mean, that is a terribly difficult, dangerous thing for me, I must say. And I just wish there was a little more. I don't know how it's done, how it can be done. A little more pressure on Sir Keir Starmer. Come out, OK, you're expecting to be the Prime Minister. You've got to be straight on this.
Yes.
What did you say to him?
I mean, he has categorically denied claims that he threatened the Speaker with losing his job should he not choose this Labour amendment.
But what did he say?
What did he say? It's a good question, and I shall be trying to find the answer to it in the course of presenting the show over the coming weeks. Let's talk about the Lee Anderson story. Can Lee be reformed is how we're headlining it. I mean, the Sunday Mirror front page is not pulling any punches. Boot out this bigot, they say. We've got a Sunday Telegraph piece talking about how Nigel Farage has said that he would be quite happy to have Lee Anderson in the reform tent. I mean, what's your view on what he said and the subsequent fallout?
Words do matter, don't they? And how you phrase things is terribly important. But I think what Lee Anderson has touched on is something that rattles around in the back of a lot of people's minds, that we do seem to have now a situation, particularly on the streets of London, our capital, every single weekend now, in particular, these huge mobs coming out with some slogans going around, and it just seems as though the mayor capitulated to them. That's a hard thing to say, isn't it? But there's not much sign of much pushback against some of this stuff.
Although, I mean, to single out the mayor, just to add some balance to this debate, I mean, you could single out the Met, and we know that the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, did. She said while she was in office that she felt that the Met were choosing sides, were playing favourites. Yeah. It's a difficult criticism to make, isn't it? Sadiq Khan is a Muslim. He has got a lot of close friends and allies in the Muslim community. But then he'll be arguing that he's London mayor for people of all religions, cultures and backgrounds. Yeah. So is it the specificity of singling out Khan? Because actually Lee Anderson hasn't really strayed far from what Suella Braverman said in the Telegraph last week.
That's absolutely true.
And it is true to say that there are some seemingly extremist elements overtaking some of these marches.
Yes, I'm afraid it does seem that. I mean, I tell you something that gets me a bit. It's this business about this phrase, from the river to the sea. That's a very inflammatory thing, actually, and I think one has got to be very clear about that. What is actually at the moment between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea? It is the State of Israel. So if we are talking about overturning that, that's a very, very dangerous thing indeed, in my view, that phrase is splashed about everywhere. I think it is time, perhaps, for the police or the mayor or whatever to say, let us please stop at least that sort of inflammatory remark being thrown onto onto Big Ben as a slogan, you know. And
people have talked about exclusion zones. I think John Mann, the former Labour MP for Bassett Law, he's done a lot on anti-Semitism, sort of in an independent capacity, both for government and indeed for the Labour Party. He's saying there should be a buffer zone around Parliament. People shouldn't be able to protest. I mean, the counter-argument to that would be, well, if you can't protest outside Parliament, where can you?
Yes, no, I think I agree with you. I think that's another slippery slope in another direction that I wouldn't want to see. But I think we've got to try to get some rules in place, if you like, and then we can turn around to people like Lee Anderson and say, no, look here. People are being very strict about this. You cannot go ahead accusing the mayor of being in hoc to Islamists in the way that he has suggested. The only way you're going to get round this, I think, is by showing a bit of strength in the other direction. You have got to address the concerns, the very, very clear and completely understandable concerns of people in the Jewish community who actually feel threatened. I've got very, very good Jewish friends who really do feel that this country now is a place where anti-Semitism is on the rise. This is, and that we've got to face that. That's a terrible thing.
Although Muslims will say, you know, the statistics suggest that Islamophobia is also on the rise, and comments like Anderson's don't help that. Just a final thought on Anderson, Nick, is the Tories' loss Reform's gain?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think what our dear friend and your fellow presenter Nigel Farage likes, having people who make waves is terrific, isn't it? But I'm not sure whether Lee Anderson would be very good for Reform or for anybody else. I think Lee, actually, I tell you what, mate, shut up.
Fair play. Let's go to the final story that we've picked out. We've picked it out because of your former guise as a BBC broadcaster. Well, to be fair, this caught your attention.
It did, oh, absolutely.
It's on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph.
Yes.
And I'll give you the headline and you can react to it from Tim Davie. BBC should be proud to be progressive, Director General told staff.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, this is just... What I think about this is when somebody like Tim Davie says this at the very top of the BBC, this is going to go straight to the heart of those who write lots of letters to your newspaper, Camilla, you know, grumpy colonels in their golf clubs. They're going to say, I told you.
To be fair, they're not all grumpy colonels. You get people of all shapes and sizes criticising the BBC for bias, to be fair.
Of course.
And the BBC, of course, denies that. But Davie's basically saying it's fine to be woke. I mean, is it at the BBC?
Well, he didn't quite say that. Actually, I think he said, you know, this is not woke, but we're proud to be progressive.
Well, should they be progressive? Should they taking any sort of stance?
I think, again, why sort of people like in these sort of prominent positions, and Director General is a very, very difficult job, and I think Tim Davie is a great fellow in many ways, but again, you know, choose your words a bit more carefully, please. Why don't people think before they speak, or put it on Twitter, or whatever they're doing with it? I know,
because they're probably rushed into putting it on Twitter. That's half the problem. Nick Owen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Now, don't move a muscle, because in just a few minutes I'll be speaking to Israel, the father of the baby whose birth certificate was defaced after being sent to the Home Office. Stay tuned. Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are
remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They
agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Piers. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I am all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead. The Tata Steel thing. Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting. You know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, genuinely, you won't want to miss the next interview because earlier I spoke to Israel, a father whose 5-month-old baby's birth certificate was returned defaced and ripped from the Home Office this week after sending it off for a passport application. It's really quite a staggering interview. Here's what he had to say. Israel, for those people coming to this story fresh this morning, what exactly happened? You had your baby's birth certificate, you sent it off as part of a passport application, and then you couldn't quite believe what you got back in the post.
Yeah, on Monday, my wife opened the letterbox and she found inside a soft envelope, just regular office envelope, which is not the regular one that we're getting usually from the passport office, which usually is come in a hard envelope. And when she opened it, she couldn't believe that the actual birth certificate is torn, damaged, and the father place of birth, which is Israel, was just scribbled out with a black pen. And the feeling for that, it's just very hard because my baby was born here. She's British citizen. She's a part of she's a member of the public, you know. She has nothing to do with Israel. Just the fact that her father was born in Israel, it was a reason for someone to damage her birth certificate and to discriminate her in such an ugly way.
It's absolutely appalling. And also it means now that the birth certificate that you had for your child is now invalidated. Obviously, this hit the headlines last week and the Home Office said they would take action. I understand that some people at the private company that processed this application have been fired. However, are you satisfied overall with the Home Office's response to this?
I was surprised to see the rapidness, how they dealt with the situation. And I must give a good word to the Home Office for the speed and fast reaction. And well, this morning we were issued with a new birth certificate that happily came in the right condition. And yeah, and we were very glad to hear that the Home Office took the matter in the appropriate the appropriate care, and they were looking into the private company who is in charge in it, and they fired some people.
Yeah. What do you think happened internally? I mean, somebody obviously who's pro-Palestinian just taking a biro to the word Israel.
Yeah, so I think maybe the people over there in this private company didn't get vetted as required by law, or they didn't check the background, like if they have any dangerous opinions that they can bring to the workplace.
Yeah.
Today it's happened to me because I was born in Israel, but tomorrow it can be if someone is not happy with England, they can do the same for any British citizen.
And how do you feel as an Israel-born Jew living in London at the moment? I mean, we've seen these reports on anti-Semitism being on the rise. How does it feel to be a Jewish couple, both born in Israel, with young children, dealing with what's been going on in recent months and weeks?
So the feeling, it's very hard. And we can sometimes... ourselves, my wife, she bought herself like self-defense pepper spray because she don't know if something will come up. And as well, when we're going to outing, our kids wearing a cap, like a baseball cap above their couple, and since everything is start, we taking our kids every morning and afternoon only with the car to school because we don't want any trouble to happen, especially for these, sweet kids. They didn't deserve anything bad to happen to them.
No, of course not. But the idea that your wife is having to take self-defense classes, what, because she is literally walking around in fear of being jumped?
Yes, we've been seeing, these videos of people in the train chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's free from us. They don't want us. And I see these people, I believe they don't want us there. They don't want us here as well.
Israel, do you have an opinion on the pro-Palestinian marches that have been taking place in London? We saw protesters light up Big Ben with a Free Palestine logo, Free Gaza. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I didn't see marches with such a scale when on daily basis Muslim people, the Uyghur people in China, persecuting, been sent to concentration camps. What's going on in Syria for the last, 11 years, and what's going in Ukraine right now. Where is all these peaceful voices when the Jewish blood involved? The story is different. And obviously, I'm not talking in general, the British public. I do see people coming to me without one words, and they're afraid as well. I'm talking about non-Jewish people that I see day to day. They're telling me they're really worried the way that England's going to.
Yeah, and you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with what's been going on in the House of Commons. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, criticised for obviously selecting that Labour amendment to the SNP notion, calling for a ceasefire. The vote's gone through calling for a ceasefire. First of all, what's your response to that in general, these calls for a ceasefire?
So I think as every human being, we all want ceasefire, but we have friends, people that I know personally that have been kidnapped to Gaza. Okay, just give us our boys and girls back home. They deserve to have a love of a family. They deserve to see their near and dear, and it's as simple as that. And in fact, most of the people that are being kidnapped, they are from the area which is a very left-wing and peace activist in Israel. And these people that got the worst that can happen to them. So we see it's nothing about peace and love, is everything is about just hate.
Yes, you make a good point there, which I think is sometimes missed, that A lot of the people killed on October the 7th, particularly those who went to the peace concert, would have been people who were quite pro-Palestinian, people who would have been calling for a two-state solution.
Yeah, and not only that, on October the 7th in the morning, it should be peace balloon, the annually balloon festival. Every year they used to take balloons for a sign of peace, and a lot of people came specially to this kibbutz to release balloons toward Gaza Strip to show them that they were looking for peace, and these people been butchered, raped, murdered, and as well kidnapped.
I mean, to bring it back to domestic matters, obviously you and your wife and your children are living here now. Are you satisfied that the police are doing enough to protect Jews in the UK?
I think the police trying to do, but unfortunately they're a bit stopped by law about what they can do. And speaking privately to the police officers, they telling me, we are sorry, we can't do much more, and stuff like that.
Israel, when you are personally targeted, or your young baby is targeted, I mean, it must bring it home awfully. How are you feeling about it all now? Because I'd imagine that you and your wife were terribly shaken up by this.
Yeah, we're feeling, just the word for it is frustrated. We just scared. That's the word for it. We don't know what's going on. Like, the Home Office supposed to be the most secure place with the most sensitive documents been sent in. So the person that had my baby birth certificate have all our details beside of my trouser size, everything about me.
Yeah. And then for that to be sort of abused in that way is really frightening. I just wanted to ask you what your response was to Prince William's statement in the week. I don't know if you saw it. He courted a little bit of criticism, the heir to the throne, for sort of involving himself in geopolitical matters. As I'm sure you're aware, members of the royal family are meant to be resolutely impartial. And yet some praise the statement because, as well as calling for peace in Gaza and an end to the bloodshed, he also, of course, acknowledged the fact that Hamas had to give up the hostages for there to be peace. What was your reaction to that royal intervention?
Firstly, I have a lot of respect to the royal family, and I think he's intent to do good. And of course, we all want the end of this war. But there is a condition for that. Just bring them home. Simple as that. It could be very easy. Just bring them home. They deserve to live a normal, quiet life in these agricultural communities around Gaza Strip. And I'm assuming by the second they will get home, everything will be quiet. And I think the prince have the power to aim his speech more toward Hamas leaders and the other terrorist organizations in Gaza Strip. Just ask him one simple question. Bring them home.
OK, Israel, I think that's a great point on which to end. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed there to Israel. It should be pointed out that I did conduct that interview a couple of days ago, so it was before Lee Anderson made his comments. Otherwise, I would have, of course, asked him about them. Lots more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Deputy PM, Oliver Dowden, and I'll be speaking to the former leader of Unite and close friend of Jeremy Corbyn, Len McCluskey. Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called Telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls
movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come in the next hour. We've got Deputy PM Oliver Dowden. After suspending Lee Anderson, are the Tories about to suffer their first defection to reform? And I'll be speaking to Red Len McCluskey in just a minute for his take on Starmer's leadership and the great divide troubling Labour over the Israel-Hamas conflict. But first, here's the news with Pip Thompson.
Good morning, it is 10 o'clock. I'm Pip Thompson in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has been accused of harbouring extremists in his party, with the Labour leader saying it's time for him to get a grip. Now, this comes after Lee Anderson, the former deputy chair, was suspended from the Tory party after he said London Mayor Sadiq Khan was controlled by Islamists. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, says Rishi Sunak's weakness allowed the MP to act with impunity. The MP says he has fully accepted the whip being removed and will continue to support government efforts to call out extremism in all its forms. Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after that chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support concrete actions. The UK has launched another round of airstrikes overnight against Houthi targets in Yemen. In a joint operation with the United States, 18 sites were hit across 8 locations. The Ministry of Defence says precision-guided bombs were used against drones and launchers. It follows a surge in attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. It's the 4th time the UK has been involved in strikes against the Iranian-backed group since mid-January. Donald Trump is another step closer to becoming the Republicans' presidential nomination. It's after he beat Nikki Haley in the South Carolina Republican contest, claiming 60% of the votes. It's his 4th straight primary win, despite being engulfed in legal problems and South Carolina being Nikki Haley's home state. A local action group has won their fight over plans to house asylum seekers in a town in Cumbria. Initial plans were to use 8 homes in the Millham area to hold 40 migrants, despite severe housing shortages. It sparked backlash in the community, with police having to increase patrolling after one of the houses was vandalised. In a letter seen by GB News, the Home Office has now ruled that the site is not suitable for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millham Communication Action Group exclusively told GB News that the community is relieved.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs. No one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, it's back to Camilla.
Thank you, Pip. Well, welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Deputy PM, Oliver Dowden. Does he still stand by Sir Lindsay Hoyle after this week's chaos in the Commons? And I'll, of course, be getting his take on Lee Anderson's suspension. I'll be asking the former head of Unite, Len McCluskey, whether Starmer's Palestine problem will continue to be a headache for Labour, and if Jeremy Corbyn can make a comeback to rock the boat ahead of the next general election. I'll also be joined by former Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkin as we mark 2 years on from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Following the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, what can the West do to stop Putin? And Blanche Zaff from the Lone Charge Action Group will be telling us how the row with HMRC has caused some people to take their own lives. Could this be the next post office scandal? I'm joined now in the studio by former General Secretary of the Unite Union, Len McCluskey. Len, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for coming in. Let's have a chat about Starmer, because I know you're not his biggest fan and you have been quite critical of the Labour leader in the past. You rated him as poor in 2021. How do you rate him now?
Even poorer.
I mean, but he's so far ahead in the polls, Len.
Well, and I'm sure his advisors are telling him that he's doing the right thing. The problem is, of course, he's been attacking my wing of the Labour Party. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 54 years, the left wing of the party, expelling people and creating an atmosphere of fear within the Labour Party. I mean, that has brought about a terrible, terrible divide, which is not needed.
Hang on a minute, though, Len. Let's not rewrite history here, because wasn't it Jeremy Corbyn, your very close friend, the man with whom you've written this poetry book, which we'll be discussing in just a moment? Jeremy Corbyn's the one that divided the Labour Party, isn't he? He's the one who caused MPs like Luciana Berger, because she was Jewish, to leave the party. He left a huge legacy of anti-Semitism within the party that Starmer's done a good job of cleaning up.
That simply isn't true. I know the media have tried to produce this imagery of, under Corbyn, Labour was an anti-Semitic party, but even the HRC, who investigated Labour, and they were investigating an accusation that Labour was riddled with anti-Semitism, they found that that wasn't true.
You said that it's the media. Jewish Labour MPs were saying it, weren't they?
No, I mean,
yes, they were.
Well, lots of
Luciana Berger was saying it. Margaret Hodge was saying it. Lots of Jewish Labour MPs. Ian Austin, who's got Jewish heritage.
Yes, but you're talking
These people had to leave the party.
Well, Camilla, you're talking about right-wing Labour MPs who had a specific agenda.
Jewish MPs, I think.
No, we're talking about right-wing Labour MPs who had an agenda to undermine the Corbyn leadership.
But why do you think Corbyn had a problem with Jewish Labour MPs leaving his party?
Because they were right-wing.
They were right-wing?
He had a problem with a number...
Luciana Berger was right-wing. She went and joined a Social Democrat party.
Let me answer your questions. It'll work better that way. The reality is that he had a problem with a number of right-wing MPs who sought to undermine his leadership. That's a reality. Now, of course, the whole anti-Semitism was examined and investigated by the HRC, and read their report. They made it clear that there was no inherent anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Corbyn had condemned anti-Semitism. He's fought against anti-Semitism all his life.
OK, so he may have condemned anti-Semitism, and I did hear him repeatedly refer to himself as somebody who has fought racism all his life, why didn't he condemn Hamas and Hezbollah? I mean, he must regret describing Hamas as friends now that he's seen them rape and murder 1,400 Israelis.
You'll have to bring Jeremy on your programme and ask him. I've already condemned Hamas. I've condemned also the hypocrisy of everybody who wants to condemn one side but leaves Israel, the Israeli government, completely free from any condemnation, despite the fact that they break international law with the settlements in occupied territory. And what's going on in Gaza at the moment is just outrageous. It's slaughter. It's evil. And there's a saying that evil will only prosper. Evil will only prosper if good men and women stand silent. And I'll tell you this, Camilla, history will judge those who've been complicit in this evil and those who've stood on the sidelines and stayed silent.
But does any degree of sort of tragedy in Gaza justify projecting onto Big Ben the words "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," when it is so deeply offensive to Israeli and Jewish people?
The reality, of course, is that from the river to the sea is a slogan that seeks to create a Palestine that is viable, which is international law.
I think Jews and Israelis. Well, when you say Jews, you talk. When you say wipe Jews, it from the map. That isn't true. From the river to the sea. That isn't true, Camilla. Because Hamas's founding statement wants to wipe Jews off the face of the earth.
Hamas doesn't speak for everyone. They certainly don't speak for all Jewish people, and they don't speak, for example, for the Palestine Authority. The reality of
Hamas are the Palestine Authority, though.
No, they're not. They're not.
So do you want Hamas to be deposed in Gaza?
I say that if we got rid of the settlements, the illegal settlements, and created a viable Palestine, which is international law, then Hamas would vanish anyway, because we would have a proper recognition. Let me put this to you. Our government believes in a two-state solution. If it's not just lip service, then why don't they recognise the state of Palestine now? I've been listening to David Cameron with some interesting comments.
Hamas because they're prescribed terrorists to down their weapons, and they want the hostages to be freed immediately. I mean, surely you support that, Len?
Absolutely, 100%. I also support what international law has been saying for over 50 years, condemning Israel for the occupation of settlements that are illegal.
Camilla, take your point on settlements.
I would just ask you and your viewers...
But, of course, they haven't occupied Gaza since 2005.
To look at the map. The map that was drawn up in 1947, the map that was drawn up in 1967, supported by international law of what Israel is and what Palestine is. Look now at that map.
When Israel left Gaza in 2005, they left them with the infrastructure to really make something great of that country. We've had claims of genocide, which don't seem to be borne out in the population statistics for Gaza and indeed that area, because, of course, the population has gone up. So all of this talk about Israeli occupation, I take your point on settlements, but the Israelis haven't been there in almost 20 years, have they?
Camilla, you cannot take my point on settlements and just leave it at that.
No, but
let's have a proper
point,
debate.
Isn't it?
No, let's
because there's lots of Israelis and Jews that don't think there should have been settlements.
Oh, okay? Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think we can talk about that.
By the way, both here in Britain, all Jewish, in fact, the majority of the Jewish community here in Britain, I think, are appalled at the slaughter that's taken place.
When you said you have in Mossad the most sophisticated organisation in the world, much more so than MI5, MI6, CIA, are we really led to believe that they didn't know this was happening? What do you mean by that? That you think that Mossad knew that the October the 7th attacks were going to happen?
There is a conspiracy theory, not that I particularly support it. That said, the idea that Mossad, and the Egyptians, of course, say that they told Mossad something was happening, and that the idea that Mossad, this highly sophisticated security system didn't know was happening is difficult to believe.
But then you're veering into the territory of that conspiracy theory of suggesting that the Israelis knew about October the 7th and let it happen so that they could then attack Gaza.
That's precisely...
You don't buy into that, do you?
No, that's precisely why you've quoted something that I was making the point that people are raising that issue. They're also raising the issue that did Hamas not know that that type of an attack was going to bring the incredible response from Israel in the way that it is, i.e. Hamas playing games as well. There's all kinds of issues. What I do know is that there are thousands and thousands of women and children being slaughtered at the moment in Gaza.
Yes.
And we're standing round playing games in Parliament about procedures.
Well, actually, there's a report today to say that they may be quite close to a 6-week ceasefire.
Yes, well, what we need...
And also there are women, aren't there, in Gazan tunnels, Hamas tunnels, who are probably still being raped and tortured as we speak.
The reality is that the only way to resolve this issue is for the international community, in particular America and Britain, to insist that Netanyahu, almost an international criminal himself, dismantles the settlements, withdraws to the 1967 Green Line and allows the creation of a Palestinian viable state. That's the way to resolve it.
You said at the beginning of the conversation you thought it was wrong for the likes of Corbyn and I assume also Abbott, MacDonald to be expelled from the Labour Party. Would you like to see them back in then?
Of course. I mean,
so if there's a sort of left-wing caucus that tries to challenge Starmer either now or if he becomes Prime Minister, will you lend them your support? Would you like to depose Starmer?
It's not a question of deposing Starmer. It's a question about Starmer has been elected on a radical programme that he's completely ditched now. He fooled everyone, untruthful. The reality is, what kind of Labour government do we want? We want one that changes for the good of ordinary working people. I know, but that Labour
government that was proposed by Jeremy Corbyn was spectacularly annihilated in the 2019 election.
Well, don't rule out 2017. 13 million people voted for Corbyn.
But
more people, Camilla...
More people wanted Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn.
Here's an interesting fact for you. More people voted for Jeremy Corbyn in England than voted for Tony Blair. The fact of the matter is that 2019 was all about Brexit.
What are you saying? You object to Starmer because you think he's some sort of Thatcherite?
Well, there's no doubt that he's been captured by the establishment and the right wing of the party, and he won't do anything for ordinary working people.
Len, let's just have a quick word about this book. Very briefly, Len, you've written this book with Jeremy Corbyn, so you're both poets, or at least admirers of poetry.
We're very much admirers of poetry, and this is an effort to say to people, look, poetry is not just for posh people, it's for everyone. So embrace poetry because it's got a fantastic emotional pull.
I can agree with you on that. Len McCluskey, thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning. Really lovely to speak to you. Well, you won't want to miss what's still to come in today's show because in just a minute, Sir Malcolm Rifkin will join me and I'll be speaking to Oliver Dowden, the Deputy PM, to find out why the government hasn't pushed Sir Lindsay Hoyle's resignation and to get the reaction to Lee Anderson's suspension. Stay tuned. In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offender behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by Deputy PM Oliver Dowden, the Conservative MP for Hertsmere. Mr Dowden, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for joining me. Let's kick off with Lee Anderson then.
Good morning, Camilla.
Is he an Islamophobe as far as you're concerned?
No, I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but
Why
words
are you
matter,
suspending
and
him
the
then?
choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
But why would you remove the whip from him when you say he isn't an Islamophobe? I mean, surely it's a free country. He can express himself how he likes. He said that he thought he expressed himself clumsily, but as far as I can tell, he hasn't said anything really that Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has said.
Well, I think the difference between what he said and what Suella said was about specifically targeting one individual. And believe me, I have huge problems with Sadiq Khan. I experience it pretty much every day, his war on the motorists or his failure to build houses in London because of his absurd affordability requirements. But linking the two through religion, I think that's something that Lee himself has accepted. He was given that opportunity to apologise, and he didn't do so, so the whip has been suspended.
Why wasn't the whip suspended from Zach Goldsmith during the 2016 campaign, or at least why wasn't he sanctioned by the Tory party when he made very similar remarks about Sadiq Khan? He said about the London mayor that he was giving cover to extremists. He said Sadiq Khan had, quotes, given platforms, oxygen and even cover over and over again to those who seek to do our police and capital harm. He then suggested that Khan had, quotes, tried to silence questions about his links to extremists by shamelessly accusing anyone who raises them of being Islamophobic. Zach Goldsmith has been far more strident in his criticism of Sadiq Khan's links to, quotes, extremists than Lee Anderson. So why wasn't he removed of the whip and sanctioned by the Tory party? He was running as your London mayor at the time.
Well, Camilla, we're going back quite a long way, and you're testing my memory of what happened during that campaign.
Well, I've just told you what happened.
The quotes that you use, what I would say about the quotes that you've used there and relayed to me is that there is this difference between, by the way, I support robust political debate and robust exchange of views and robust questions being asked, as opposed to linking specifically to this point about Sadiq Khan's mates and the concern about the implication of that. As I say, I don't believe that Lee Anderson was motivated by Islamophobia, but there is concern about that language. He was given the opportunity to apologise. By his own admission, he said that it was clumsy language. His failure to do so led to the whip being suspended from him.
But I'm just pointing out the inconsistency in the disciplinary process here, that Zach Goldsmith said actually in stronger terms that Sadiq Khan was linked to extremists than Lee Anderson has, and yet he faced no sanction. Is it maybe that you feel that Lee Anderson isn't quite the right fit for the Tory party, that he's a bit rough around the edges, that he speaks his mind, and it's all a bit too sort of honest for the constituency and indeed for the Tory public?
No, I mean, nothing could be further from the truth than that. And actually, I have great sympathy and indeed agree with the underlying sentiments, although I wouldn't choose their language, from both Suella Braverman and from Lee Anderson. You and I have talked before about how we grew up in Hertfordshire and the values of the country that we know and love. I don't think any of us would have imagined that in our lifetimes, debates in Parliament were being threatened by threats of violence against members of Parliament. And this forms part of a chain that we have seen, whether it's Jews in my constituency afraid to walk the streets because they're showing symbols of their religion, or it's those hate-filled marches where people still walk alongside them on the marches but don't call it out. And we, all of us, of course there's a law enforcement response to this, but there's also underlying questions about the sort of society we live in and all of our responsibility to call this kind of conduct out.
I know, but Mr Dowd, I mean, it's all very well giving a commentary of what's going on. We're all familiar with what's going on. We all saw Big Ben lit up with the words "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" a few days ago. What are you actually going to do about it?
Well, that was totally unacceptable, using that clearly anti-Semitic trope. And I was waiting for a while to come on to your interview. I was listening to your interview with Len McCluskey. There still seems to be some sort of equivocation about that. It is undoubtedly anti-Semitic. The police are obviously operationally independent, but I know that the Home Secretary has taken this up with the police. What I would say in relation to a lot of these, and I often find myself discussing this with constituents, just because immediate action isn't taken doesn't mean action isn't being taken. So, for example, it is a case that there have been over 600 arrests. There are over 200 ongoing live investigations in relation to some of these offensive conduct. For example, one of them has been publicised, these people that were wearing the parachutists' insignia on their clothing. So action is being taken. It's not always obvious that that is being taken immediately.
Well, but shouldn't it have been taken immediately in the case of projecting onto Big Ben? I mean, that is probably one of the most recognisable London landmarks. Shouldn't it have been taken at the time? I mean, shouldn't the police have stopped it? Yes,
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, and they should have done. And the Home Secretary has made that point to the police. Obviously, we live in a society, and I think it is right, the society, we live in a society where the police are operationally independent. They have to take the decisions as to how they conduct their operations, but the Home Secretary has left the police in no doubt at all that they should take action in respect of this.
But this must be frustrating for you, because we read in the Sunday Express today that this operation to police these marches is costing 30 million. I had your former colleague, Suella Braverman, in the studio a few weeks ago saying the police have the powers to stop this, and they aren't using them. So how much pressure is the Prime Minister and others piling on the police to say use these powers, stop these marches, stop people from chanting these anti-Semitic slogans in the street? Because I'm afraid the government does look quite weak on this. We had Tower Bridge closed down yesterday. We've got these offensive slogans projected onto Big Ben. Why aren't the government doing more? Why aren't you forcing the police to use the powers they have?
Well, I think there's two elements. So one is that putting pressure on the police to take action. As I said to you in my previous answer, it genuinely is the case that the police are taking lots of action, over 600 arrests. There is always more for them to do, and we're pushing for that. In addition, we're looking at gaps where there are insufficient powers. So, for example, clambering onto war memorials and and making sure that that is clearly illegal. There's a more fundamental question. There is an issue of debate. I do have some sympathy for people that say we should just ban these marches altogether. I think, you know, we have freedom of expression in this country, so I wouldn't favour banning the marches altogether, but I do favour robust policing. As I say, sometimes you don't see that immediately, but it is these people are being held to account. And I think what you'll see in the coming weeks and months is more and more of these prosecutions finding their way into court, and people will see there is action that is flowing from it.
OK, final question on Mr Anderson, Mr Dowden. Would you like to see him join Reform? Nigel Farage says he's welcome there with open arms.
No, I certainly wouldn't. And I think that all of us who share the concerns and the anger about how what is happening in our democracy right now need a government that is robust in response to it. I don't have confidence, given what you saw last week, the meeting that Keir Starmer had with the Speaker, him urging him to change parliamentary procedure. I don't have confidence that there will be that robustness from Keir Starmer. In the end, that's the choice,
OK, but
Rishi Sunak
or
Keir Starmer, and I think
if you don't
we should
want
unite
to see,
together.
If you don't want to see Lee Anderson go to Reform, what should he do then? Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the Chief Whip.
OK. Mr Dowden, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by Thatcher's former Minister and Major's Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkin. 2 years on from the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and following the death of Putin's nemesis, Alexei Navalny, should the West be playing a more active role in this conflict? Don't go anywhere.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can turn down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. Well, and I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews at gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by Sir Malcolm Rifkin, former Foreign Secretary from 1995 to 1997, but an MP for a lot longer than that. Sir Malcolm, lovely to see you.
Thank you.
2 years on from the Ukraine invasion, hard to believe actually, 2 years on. What do you think is the prospect of peace there?
Well, I think you have to start by saying, what does Putin privately think?
Yeah.
What did he intend when he started this ghastly war 2 years ago? He thought it would be all over within a week and a half.
Yes.
Not even a war, a special military operation was the phrase used. It's been a total disaster for the Ukrainians, but it's been an even greater disaster for Putin, because he ends up, having been humiliated by a weaker country,
yes,
being able to actually stop the Russians and indeed reverse some of their gains. But also, this was all about NATO and question of NATO membership. What happens? Sweden and Finland,
yes,
who've been neutral for 150 years, are now members of NATO.
Yeah, NATO now strengthened.
Well, the Baltic Sea is now a NATO sea,
yes,
with only a very small Russian coast. Think of the gas industry, one of the most important industries for the country. Gazprom, one of the biggest companies in the world, is approaching bankruptcy. 80% of its revenue has been lost.
Agree with you, although the Russian economy is booming.
Only because of military expansion. That doesn't help ordinary Russians.
I mean, I read today 7.5% of GDP being spent on defences in Russia, which is an extraordinary
They've virtually doubled their defence expenditure, which shows how successful the Ukrainians have been.
OK, so we congratulate the Ukrainians for being successful. Having said that, we've seen Putin basically laugh in the face of the Western world with the, I think, state-sponsored assassination of Alexei Navalny. How does that change the picture?
Well, the question of the assassination of Navalny is not spitting in the face of the world, it's spitting in the face of the Russian people.
Yeah.
Because he did that because he was frightened of Navalny. When Navalny was free to operate in a normal political way, huge numbers of people were supporting him. And Putin began to panic. And it is a sign, yet all these things that Putin does, ultimately they're a sign of his weakness.
Yes.
Like having to have what is in fact a phony election. Why does he have to go through this farce of an election when everybody knows nobody else is able to stand against him? Why? Because he likes to pretend that he is a democratic leader that has legitimacy. And the Russian public aren't stupid. They know perfectly well he hasn't.
Although we haven't had an uprising in response to Navalny, because we can't have an uprising, because obviously 200 or 300 people were arrested in Moscow the morning after. I remember us speaking before on this show, and you were talking about being quite confident that Putin would be deposed at some point. I mean, we see Putin's reign ending either with him being deposed or indeed dying in office. What do you think the prospect is now? Not least because I think since we spoke, Prigozhin's obviously been assassinated as well.
Well, all these things that happen are not signs of Putin's strength. I know they seem to be in one sense, but they're signs of weakness, that he has to behave in this way, blowing up one of his opponents in an aircraft, killing a guy who's already locked up in an Arctic prison. Now, the fact that he has to go beyond that and dispose of them by murder, that shows ultimately his weakness. Now, Putin can hang on for a while. I mean, Russia doesn't have a Politburo like it had in the Soviet days when they got rid of Khrushchev very easily. But the people around Putin know that he has not been able to deliver this easy conflict that would destroy Ukraine and restore them to being part of the Russian Federation. Now, I'm not underestimating the problem the Ukrainians have, because they are a far smaller country. Russia is a country of 130 million people. Ukraine has about 30 million. When the war began, the Ukrainian army, do you know how big it was? About 20, 30,000. It's now got over 500,000 troops.
Yes.
It's now the most powerful army in Europe.
So you seem quite confident
in terms of numbers.
President Zelensky and his troops forcing the Russians out, or do you think ultimately there'll have to be a carving up of territory?
Well, I don't know what will happen ultimately, because so many options are possible. But what is increasingly likely is that the Ukrainians, in the short term, are going to be not able to recover all the territory they lost over the last few years. And because it started with the occupation of Crimea in 2014, they don't seem to have the military strength to do that. But what we have seen over the last year is very significant for Russia as well as for Ukraine. The Ukrainians have been superb at defending their own territory. much more difficult, and it's always known to military people, that to actually advance and occupy your enemy's territory requires far more troops, far more weapons, whereas to defend, you just simply dig in and stop. Now, that's what the Russians have been doing over the whole of the last year. It may be the Ukrainians have to do a bit of that as well.
Sure.
And then it will be clear to Putin that he has no chance of occupying any further kind of Ukrainian territory.
Let's just move to domestic matters.
Yes.
In a way, domestic matters influenced by foreign policy. The scenes in the Commons last week, the scenes of From the River to the Sea, Palestine will be free, being projected onto Big Ben. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, you're quite a prominent Jewish former politician. How did that feel, seeing that on the mother of all parliaments?
Well, my own personal view is, first of all, the police have to be allowed operational freedom. I think they made a mistake on this occasion, because not just because of the River to the Sea slogan. I think anybody attempting to put a slogan on the walls of Big Ben for political reasons, whatever the subject is, if the police have the means to stop them doing that, they should do that right away, regardless of the subject matter. That's part of the building of Parliament. It's not there to advertise political slogans, whatever the subject. On the question of the House of Commons, look, we know that if you have a free Parliament, not just in Britain, but in real democracies, Parliaments sometimes misbehave. Mistakes are made. People behave in a way that doesn't look very impressive to the general public. Remember always the alternative. The alternative is the Russian Duma, the Chinese Parliament, where you have hundreds of people. They sit there like dummies. They all vote exactly the same way, never a word of criticism, beautifully behaved. But is that exactly the kind of House of Commons we want? So, OK, accept that occasionally it's overdone. Most of the time, Parliament is there to represent not the government, but the public as a whole. And there will be deep disagreements and at times of high emotion, which this obviously is.
You lived through these times of high emotion during the 80s, you know, under Thatcher, of course, there were deep divisions. But this threatening behaviour towards MPs, and particularly the notion of Jewish MPs feeling threatened, or at least MPs in constituencies that have a lot of Jewish voters feeling threatened, must sort of professionally worry you, but also personally worry you.
Well, of course, that is hugely distasteful and hugely concerning. Remember the increase in anti-Muslim incidents in Britain has gone up 300% over the same period of time. Not as much as anti-Semitism, but most of the anti-Semitism is actually anti the Israeli government. It is a difference of view, very deeply held, as to Israel's government and Israel's policies, and that is inevitably what causes high emotions on both sides. And what we all need to do, is particularly in a country like Britain, which is famous for its tolerance. I mean, London is the most tolerant capital city in Europe and in the wider world. A lot of people will say that, including people from other countries. So that has to be maintained. And there is a risk. Not the general public. The vast majority of British people remain despising the bigots and zealots, whichever side of the argument they come from.
Is Netanyahu a problem for Israel moving forward with the question about proportionality? Should he go?
Well, that's for the Israelis, but we know now already that something like 80% of Israelis believe he should go. And I think what will happen, he will remain in power during this period of the fighting. When the fighting stops, and it will stop, whether it's days, weeks, or even a couple of months, it will stop. Then the war coalition will break up. And although he will refuse to resign, remember what happened when he tried to bring forward these judicial reforms? 500,000 Israelis, week after week, month after month, demonstrating. It'll be twice as large. And what if they're sensible, they'll be demanding, is not Netanyahu, you must go. It will be Netanyahu, there must be a general election. If you think you have the support of the Israelis, have an election and we'll all find out whether you're right or wrong. Much more difficult for him to refuse then.
Final, very, very quick question, if you could be brief as possible. So, Malcolm, talking of elections, we're looking to the US. Donald Trump has done very well in Haley's state yesterday. Joe Biden, too old to run again?
I don't believe this stuff. You know, first of all, Henry Kissinger lived till he was 100 and his brain was 100% clear right throughout. I know Biden. I don't know him well. I met him a few years ago. Biden, I think, has been a damn good president in very difficult circumstances.
Well, even in recent
forgive me, if the alternative is Donald Trump, there's almost any other candidate I would vote for rather than Donald Trump. And Biden comes pretty high up my list.
On that note, to Malcolm Rifkin, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Thank you. Up next, I'm going to be speaking to former Defence Secretary and GB News presenter Michael Portillo.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online there's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Blanche Zaff from the Loan Charge Action Group will be in the studio with me very shortly to discuss how HMRC is making life a misery for a group of workers facing unexpected tax bills. But first, let's have a chat with former Defence Secretary and my fellow GB News host, Michael Portillo. He's up at 11. Michael, first of all, before you tell me who you've got on the show today, I would be intrigued to find out what you made of the events in the Commons last week with Sir Lindsay Hoyle almost facing the chop.
Obviously, I think Lindsay Hoyle made a mistake. And I think the particular mistake he made was when they raised with him the question that members of Parliament were being intimidated. He thought that was a reason to give way and change the procedures of the House. I think his reaction should have been the opposite. He should have said, precisely because intimidation is in play here, we have to make sure that we do not change the procedures of the House, because, of course, if we give in to intimidation, there will be more intimidation. So that's where I think he got it wrong.
Couldn't agree more. Now, tell us who you've got coming up at 11.
Well, just picking up on that, it was interesting that the Speaker said one thing and the Clerk of the House said another. We've had a row between Kemi Badenoch and Henry Staunton, who was the chairman of the Post Office. I want to look into the relations between elected people and officials, who now seem to be slagging each other off in public in a fairly routine sort of way. I'm also very intrigued by a movie that is playing in Russia. It is a satire on the repression that occurred under the Stalinist era. Amazingly, the film has not been banned, and the theatres are absolutely packed with Russians wanting to see this film. And one other thing I thought I'd look into today, actually in a packed programme, is the Royal Navy recently launched a Trident, supposedly nuclear deterrent missile, and it fell a few feet from where it was launched, flopped into the sea. Another terrible embarrassment for the Royal Navy. Do we have a functioning nuclear deterrent?
Very good question. Looking forward to all of that from 11 with Michael Portillo. Well, in just a minute, as I've said, I'm going to be speaking to Blanche Zaff. She's a spokesperson for the Loan Charge Action Group. You'll have heard about this. You'll have heard about people getting these unprecedented tax bills, and some people have actually been driven to taking their own lives because of this scandal. Could it be the next post office scandal? That's kind of what I'm going to be asking Blanche in just a moment. But first, let's get a very quick weather bulletin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got some heavy rain across southern parts of England and Wales today, turning quite windy as well, but brighter for many of us. This morning, a mixed picture. We've got the heavy rain across parts of Devon, Cornwall, southwest Wales, slowly pushing its way eastwards through the day. Elsewhere, some mist and fog to start with, but this should lift and break. And then there'll be plenty of sunny spells, particularly across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland. A few showers possible here and perhaps northern England later, but the winds will increase across southern coastal counties of England, perhaps Wales too. Gales for some. Outbreaks of heavy rain could lead to some localised flooding. Temperatures near average for the time of year, so in any sunshine, not feeling too bad further north. As we go through into the evening time, we'll see the heavy rain continue, perhaps transferring more into southeastern areas with the rain becoming lighter across the southwest. Elsewhere, clear spells, temperatures dropping below freezing under the clearest skies in Scotland, holding up under the cloud and the strengthening wind further south and east. So a grey start to Monday here. Outbreaks of rain generally holding on across the far southeast, but eventually clearing later on in the day. Elsewhere, a bright day, mixture of sunny spells, scattered showers. Best of the sunshine across the north and the west of the UK. Quite a keen northeasterly breeze for parts of England, particularly near the coast, which will make it feel quite chilly for the time of year. Temperatures on face value generally near average for the time of year.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Blanche Zaff joins me now from the Loan Charge Action Group. You'll no doubt be familiar with the loan charge, but not quite understand what has gone on. Blanche, explain it to us, because we know that this is a sort of David versus Goliath battle against HMRC on behalf of your members. What actually happened?
It only affects contractors. So PAYE people go to work, it's their national insurance and tax is deducted at source. And then there are contractors whose are not PAYE because they don't work for one employer. And if they only work for a few months, the employer doesn't want the obligation of all the employee benefits of pension, holiday, sickness. So about 25 years ago, HMRC wanted to draw a red line, and they brought out something called IR35, which is incredibly complicated. And contractors have gone to reputable accountants, umbrella companies to make sure they're on the correct side of that and compliant. And they've done that without a problem. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of years ago, HMRC brought in a retrospective tax called the loan charge, and that originally went back 20 years. At the Loan Charge Action Group, we're very upset. We campaigned for it to be looked into, and HMRC investigated themselves and said, no, it's OK.
HMRC investigated themselves, which is ringing alarm bells with me, Blanche. But we are talking about some huge sums. So before I came on air, my producer gave me an email that you had sent on in advance of this. One retired couple who have been told that HMRC is demanding £91,000.
Yes, they're members of ours, and they hadn't heard anything for several years. They'd emailed into the Loan Charge Action Group. The guy said he felt suicidal, so we acted immediately. I called him, I spoke to him, hadn't heard from HMRC for ages, and they want £91,000.
Sorry, how does the taxman, stroke woman, expect people, particularly in retirement, to come up with this money? I mean, presumably they're saying, right, well, sell your home, take it out of your pension. I mean, this is not tax that people were expecting to pay. They thought they had done the right thing by getting the umbrella companies and getting accountants to handle all this, correct?
Correct. And essentially, when contractors are on the correct side of IR35, it's the umbrella companies or the end client who should be responsible for tax and NI, which all of these contractors have paid. And every single year, the accountants and also the umbrella companies have submitted their annual returns, which have been accepted by HMRC.
So HMRC digging its heels in over this, I would assume you have been heavily lobbying government ministers and MPs. What's the kind of reaction from that side of the political fence?
Well, originally, it was very difficult to explain to MPs what this was, that this was retrospective. And it is, because you have to be IR35 compliant. HMRC were accepting them, and we had to lobby MPs and educate them on something that we didn't quite understand. And these days, MPs have become smart. They're listening to their constituents. They're reading all the documents from HMRC, which are very lengthy and complicated. And in fact, there's something called an APPG, which basically means...
An all-party parliamentary group?
Yes.
On the loan charge, I presume, which is putting pressure on. I mean, where does the pressure have to go? Is this something that Jeremy Hunt could solve?
I don't know. MPs are standing up. There's almost 260 on this group, cross members.
Right.
Every single party. There are just under 100 Conservatives and just over 70 Labour parliamentarians. There are debates, there are Treasury questions at Treasury. HMRC is not listening. But I will say one thing, because Jessie Norman, who was one of the previous secretaries to HMRC, to the Treasury, actually stood up and said in Parliament he can't go after the umbrellas because they have done nothing wrong.
Right.
Now...
So go after ordinary people instead?
Yes, so what I've done is I've copied one of the brochures. Probably can't read it, it's a terrible photocopy. But they all said the same thing. They're...
in a nutshell, they're saying, we'll take care of this tax for you. You don't have anything to worry about. Everything will be fine. Yes. Now, this is AML. Doug Burriman is related to this and many other companies. He's the husband of Michelle Mone, PPE scandal. Be careful here, Blanche, because obviously Barrowman and others, AML, aren't here to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
But you're saying this idea of putting the onus on the actual taxpayer as opposed to trying to take to task people who might have given this accountant's advice is wrong. Tell me about the human cost of this, because I did read this morning that 10 people who have had these loan charges applied have taken their own lives.
Yes, HMRC should have carried out a proper impact assessment. They haven't. 10 people have lost their lives. Many people have become insolvent. Many people have sold their homes or raided their pensions simply to come up with the money. The worst thing is that when you sign a document with HMRC, they want you to admit that the guilt is yours, and also if any law changes, you cannot go back to them for any refund. Now, there was a review that reduced the retrospective part from 20 years to 10 years. And just recently, HMRC brought out a section S.684, which they have transferred the liability from the employer, the client, to the employee.
Oh, so us. Right, got it.
And that means, as far as I understand it, they can go backwards or forwards as they wish. So there's no tax certainty, there's no tax fairness, there's no rule of law. Everybody can submit their tax returns, but there's nothing to stop HMRC.
And when you've said to HMRC, look, this is driving some people to consider taking their own lives, we've got retired couples facing 92 grand bills, what's the reaction?
The reaction is whoever is the Secretary to the Treasury at the time stands at the dispatch box and reads out the response from HMRC.
Stock response from HMRC.
Stock response, yes.
So they're not really reacting to the human cost of all this?
If they were, they wouldn't have brought out 684. If they were trying to make it easier for the taxpayer, they wouldn't look up a clause. And that clause wasn't even brought out for this reason. They've adapted it.
I mean, is this the next post office scandal? Because it sounds to me as if the so-called little men and women are suffering here at the hands of, you know, bad accountancy advice and HMRC using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
It wasn't bad advice. It was legal at the time.
Yeah,
it's because the law is retrospective.
They've changed the
rules.
goalposts have shifted and people have been caught in the middle.
And the little people include teachers.
Yes.
Airline pilots, hospital staff, every walk of life.
Blanche, thank you very much indeed for that. And I know that people can reach out to your group, can't they? They can email contact@hmrcloancharge.info. We'll put that on the website on GB News to get more information if they've been affected by this. Well, thank you to all my guests today. I'm going to be back at next Sunday, of course, at 9:30. Don't forget, Michael Portillo is up next.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of